Welcome to Classic Movie Club. I'm your host, Chad Knirk, the digital editor of Film Review. We've been celebrating cinema here at Film Review since 1944. One of my favorite things about classic movies, besides the films themselves, is having an opportunity to go behind the scenes for a close up look, especially when that experience involves original screen worn costumes. If you know classic movies, especially films from Paramount Pictures, there's a good chance you've seen her name emblazoned on hundreds of opening titles. Considered one of the great costume designers of film history, Edith Head began working for Paramount in 1924, and in 1982, her name was still appearing on screen with the posthumous release of the Steve Martin comedy Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, which was dedicated to her memory. She made waves in the late 1930s for her association with the sarong dress designed for Dorothy Lamour, and when designer Travis Banton left Paramount in 1938, Head made history as the first female head of a major studio's costume department. She continued to make history with the establishment of the Academy Award for Costume Design in 1949, which led to a record breaking run of nominations and wins of an award that helped further introduce costume designers to the general public. In pop culture, she has been referenced in songs, film, and television. She's been a stamp and a Google Doodle too, but perhaps the biggest tribute came with the character Edna Mode, the superhero costume designer in Pixar's The Incredibles. The exhibit, Edith Head, Hollywood's Costume Designer, is organized by the Oklahoma City Museum of Art and presented by the Ann Lacey Foundation. The Head-focused retrospective features 70 costumes that capture Head's expansive career. Worn by stars such as Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Veronica Lake, and Barbara Stanwyck, the costumes represent a broad look at the designs and silhouettes of one of the premier designers of the golden age of Hollywood. The exhibition takes up the museum's entire third floor, where costumes and sketches showcase Head's life and work. And today, my guest is curatorial assistant Kristen Pignolo, who shares insights about the exhibit and the career of a Hollywood icon. For those who may not know who Edith Head was, why is her legacy important?
That's a big question. I would say Edith Head is one of the major Hollywood costume designers during Hollywood's golden age, which we say roughly spans the 1930s through the 1950s. And she worked on a lot of the defining films of that time period that we still watch and talk about to this day, such as Rear Window, Sunset Boulevard, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Sabrina. She worked on hundreds of films during her career, and it was an incredibly long career. I believe it was 6 decades, and she worked right up until her death in 1981.
Her career began with a very, I would say, bold job interview at Paramount. What were Edith's origins?
You're right. It was a very, interesting job interview. She was actually a teacher of Romance languages at a school in Hollywood. She actually taught, Cecil B. DeMille's daughters, and in order to make some extra money, she became an art teacher there and started taking sketch classes at the Chouinard Art Institute, and she happened to see in the paper an ad for a job at Paramount to become a sketch artist on a film directed by Cecil B. DeMille. And yes, she did go around to her fellow classmates at Chouinard and asked them for their sketches to add to her portfolio. And she used that portfolio in her interview and passed them off as hers. Interestingly enough, I mean, pretty early on in the job, she admitted to her boss that they weren't hers, that she really was only good at painting like seascapes or landscapes. And I remember he said in his biography that it didn't even matter because she was clearly qualified for the job.
The exhibit is wholly unique to the museum. How did the project come together, and what was the vision behind this exhibit?
It was curated by Catherine Shoddick, who previously worked at the museum as a curator. Uh, Unfortunately, she left a little bit before my time, but she was brought on as a guest curator for the exhibition, so I've continued to work with Catherine as she's put this together. When I spoke with her about the exhibition, she talked about watching movies in the summer with her mom and her sisters, and just knowing that if she saw costumes by Edith Head, that they were in for a real treat. And OKCMOA actually has a film department, and previously, I think in the early 2010s, we had a costume exhibition called From Sketch to Screen,
Mm.
which featured costumes that Edith designed along with other costumes. It wasn't just solely about Edith. And that put the idea in Catherine's head that she wanted to do a costume show, but specifically about Edith and her designs.
How has the museum worked with collectors, collections, other museums to put this content together?
So Catherine and our director of collections and exhibitions, Maury Ford, were the 2 who worked to actually obtain the costumes for the show. I believe Catherine started visiting collectors around 3 years ago to see really what was out there that she could include in the show. We do have a couple of private collectors, but the majority of the exhibition comes from 2 major collections, one of which is the Paramount Pictures Archive, and
Mm.
the other the collection of Hollywood costume design that is, collected by a man named Larry McQueen.
We love Larry. He wrote a great article for us on the collection of motion picture costume design.
He's been great to work with. We Randall Throp came, who is the man behind Paramount Pictures Archive, came for the opening, and it was great to hear him talk just about how he was saving these pieces from getting tossed in the garbage or just stuck in a warehouse. We really have those people to thank for the exhibition, that there are enough costumes that they have saved and helped restore.
And in thinking about Edith, she designed for so many different genres, but there was always a function behind her decisions down to the trademark glasses that she wore.
So those glasses are actually blue tinted, and she initially started wearing those so that she could see what certain fabrics would look like on black and white film, because depending more on tone or color, like a dark red could come off as near black on screen or something like that. As color came in, she didn't need them, but they became such a part of her persona that she kept wearing them.
And she focused on really on character, on storytelling. There was a quote, "A dress is like an actor, it has to do things." A lot of the designers of this era had their own individual style, but this kind of set Edith apart from other designers because she was so story focused and so focused on the actor.
Yes, I think that is what sets Edith apart, and Catherine touches on that in the exhibition about how Edith was designing for the character. She worked with a lot of different actresses. I know notably Grace Kelly said that her designs always helped her get into character, that she was really focused on making sure that the costumes served the film and served the actor and helped them become the character that they needed to be.
And there are 70 some costumes on display in this exhibit. How will guests experience and learn about her different silhouettes and approaches to different genres, and as well as how she did have the actor in mind when she was designing?
Catherine split the exhibition into different sections, some of which correspond to genre and others that deal a little bit more with time periods.
Mm,
Like we
mhm,
have a so the first section is actually designing for the character. And
mm,
I would say she in there we get an idea of Edith and not only how she designs for the character, but also for the actress. One of my favorite costumes that we have is one worn by Barbara Stanwyck in The Lady Eve, and
Mm.
it's the Spanish-inspired top with that's beaded with a black long skirt. And
Yeah.
before this time, Barbara Stanwyck was considered a good actress, but she wasn't considered a sex symbol or something like that. And it was because costume designers that had worked with her said that she had, quote unquote, "a figure problem." But
Mm,
here, Edith actually worked with Stanwyck and took the proportions of her body, having a longer torso, and working with that to actually make her feel glamorous while also suiting the character. I think she widened the belts in the back to just make her look so incredibly tall and elegant,
mm.
and Stanwyck wrote Edith's name into every contract after, no matter what studio she was working at.
Yeah, because we think of Barbara Stanwyck being very elegant and glamorous, and so
Mhm.
that does give insight into how a designer can change the public image of an actor, either within the studio or within the greater public at large.
Oh, yeah. I mean, also part of it is some of the actors that she worked with liked her design so much that she designed for them privately,
Right.
just their own personal wardrobes as well as what they would wear on the red carpet at movie premieres.
Are there examples of that within the exhibit as well?
Unfortunately, no.
Mhm.
So we just have costumes, but we do have an outfit that was worn by Edith Head in her own personal life, who
Right.
we we know her as the woman with the blunt bangs, the dark glasses, and usually a gray two-piece skirt suit, but she really enjoyed patterned fabric and colors in her everyday life. The outfit is really stunning. It's yellow and red and
Yeah, I was surprised to see how vibrant that is.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely gives you insight into the professional side of Edith Head and also how she liked to dress personally. Obviously, her work predated the Academy Awards category for costume design, but she still got 35 nominations and won 8 times. The fact that I love is that she is still the most lauded woman in the Academy Awards, not just in costume design, but overall. There are 3 Academy Awards in the exhibit. Which films do those represent?
So, one of them is for her work on the William Wyler movie, The Heiress. Another one is for A Place in the Sun, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift. And then the last one is for Samson and Delilah.
Even with those 3 awards, I mean, if you look at those 3 designs, what a broad and interesting scope to her work, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
You've got some of her dedication to historical accuracy. She said that The Heiress was possibly the most perfect picture she had
Mm,
ever done. And the director, William Wyler, was so insistent on historical accuracy that he sent Edith to New York, because the film is set in turn of the century New York City, to study how these garments would have been made historically,
mm.
down to, button fastenings and things like that. Even Olivia de Havilland worked with Edith on maintaining historical accuracy for the costumes.
And it's great to see because it's in black and white to see the color of that gown in particular.
That's one of the things that was really surprising, is seeing how, I've been sourcing film stills because we wanted people visiting to see the actors in the costumes and how they were in the films, and just to see how different they are in person close up and how the fabric actually looks, because even the photos that we have as reference working on the exhibition don't really do them justice.
Yeah, I mean, the level of detail is pretty incredible.
It is really fascinating to see where the attention to detail goes in some of these costumes, because I was lucky enough to be able to help our textiles conservator dress the mannequins and dress forms,
Oh, amazing.
and being able to see the insides of the costumes, but also seeing where, due to time constraints or things like that, corners have been cut, let's say.
Ah, yeah. Right. Right. Because ultimately, it's just what the camera sees that matters.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And then you also have a wall of sketches, and she famously worked with a team, different sketch artists over the years. Who were head sketch artists, and what qualities helped define an original by her team?
That's such an interesting question. She worked with dozens, if not hundreds, of different sketch artists over her career. Notably, I know some of the big names are Grace Sprague. Bob Mackie started out as a sketch artist for Edith Head. The way that a costume department works, Edith, as the head of the costume department, can't take the time to sketch out dozens of costumes for a film. But what she would do is that she would go through a script and create a list of the different costumes that were needed for each scene in the film and collaborate with her sketch artists. So in a way, they are Edith's sketches, but they're also the individual sketch artist sketches themselves. Like, I know Grace Sprague is a really well-known sketch artist of Edith's, and her name will often come up when people are looking at her sketches when they come on the market.
Mhm. And that's an important distinction because we see on the screen costume design by Edith Head, but there's really a whole
Right.
department working on these pieces, working on the sketches, working on the costumes, and even down to an individual costume, there may be a wide array of sketches for that one particular costume as it evolves.
Absolutely. I mean, the process of just getting a costume approved was incredibly lengthy. Like, it had to be approved by the star wearing it, the
Mhm.
director, the producer, making sure with the set designers, the camera operators, the lighting department that everything looked good. And then she always wanted to have at least 3 fittings
Mm.
for a costume and the actor wearing it, and then hopefully you also get a screen test at the end of it. So
Wow.
really just incredibly long and involved process.
Mhm. Yeah, and then I also wanna talk about Hitchcock because in the '60s, the new brass at Paramount decided not to renew Edith's contract, and on invitation from Hitchcock, she moved to Universal. I wanna highlight the 2 Hitchcock dresses in the exhibit. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, so one of them is a costume worn by Grace Kelly in Rear Window. I believe it's the second time she appears on screen. It's a beautiful black dress with a pleated skirt and kind of, chiffon, partially see-through sleeves. And then the other one, this was a really interesting one to see in person. It's a costume worn by Kim Novak in Vertigo, her character impersonating Madeline Elster, and
Mm.
it appears almost purplish in person, but it looks
Mm.
just, like, very dark, almost black on screen. And
Mm.
it's when she jumps into the water and Jimmy Stewart saves her. So those are the 2 costumes we have from Hitchcock, and I think they really show off how what a great collaboration these 2 people had in working together. Like, they worked on 11 films, and I think Hitchcock was very exacting. Uh, that's a nice way to put it.
Yes.
But he was so concerned with the aesthetics of his films that he would write what he wanted people to wear into his scripts, which Edith said made it incredibly easy for her. And they would work together. She developed what is called a costume call board, where they would put all of the costumes for a particular scene on the board together to make sure that none of them clashed visually.
Which piece, in your opinion, is the most iconic? And I know these are
Ooh,
difficult questions to answer.
that's really tough. I'm going to say, for me, iconic, the the Lady Eve costume,
Mm.
and also the Grace Kelly Rear Window costume.
Because you did have the opportunity to dress the exhibit, which do you feel is the most intricate?
That's I mean, there are some I would say there's a blue gown in the performance and designing for Technicolor section that was created for Betty Hutton in The Perils of Pauline. That piece is entirely beaded, and it probably weighed, I don't maybe 30 pounds. It was so
Wow.
heavy.
Wow.
But then also there is a costume Natalie Wood wears in The Great Race that is it's a black gown that is has sequins and, like, a very delicate net overlay. I would say those 2.
If you were to pick a piece that was most exemplary of Edith Head's work, which
Mhm.
would you choose?
I think the heiress dress
Mhm.
is the most exemplary. I think it just combines her attention to designing for the character, historical accuracy, and making sure that she is creating a costume that truly fits the film.
One thing that I also love is hearing some of the behind the scenes stories, whether in the production of the film or through how that piece has come to the exhibit, the provenance behind it. Which do you feel has a very interesting provenance or backstory?
That's an interesting question because there are some pieces we know quite a good amount about, and then there are others we know next to nothing.
Yeah, there's some fascinating stories out there about pieces that, whether it was some of those auctions where the studios were auctioning off pieces, or whether in some cases, like things come out of the trash can, at some point.
Yeah. Randall Thropp at Paramount Pictures Archive has a lot of those kinds of stories where
Mhm.
he was there was a piece that was going to be loaned out to someone, and he would say that it was not available or not in fit enough condition to be loaned out, but be really kind of secreted away, to
Mm.
protect it.
Mhm. Mhm. We look at these pieces now as museum pieces, but
Mhm.
even, 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case, and certainly not then when you were working in a studio system and it was like a production line to get all of these films done on time, to have everything
Mhm.
ready. Things weren't necessarily seen as a historical piece that should be saved and preserved.
Right.
Mhm.
That's it's really unfortunate, but that is just the way it was, that I mean, people would use costumes from one film for another. There's several instances of that in the exhibition, which
Mhm.
I think is really interesting. Or costumes that are completely reworked to create another costume.
Yeah, I love seeing those photos, and it is also it's interesting and sad at the same time. Sometimes you see a photo from a background actor on a variety show,
Mhm.
and it's like, "That is the costume from this iconic film."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What has your experience been like with the exhibit and for all of your guests?
There's so much to talk about with the exhibition. Seeing the local support and response for it has been really great. I just gave my first tour of it this past weekend, and I mean, it's so exciting to have people who know about Edith Head and have been so excited to see this happen, and then other people who are not necessarily as familiar with her, but maybe have seen a couple of the films.
The exhibit is curated into several different sections. What are some areas that we haven't talked about, and what's one of your favorite sections?
We do also have 2 screening areas in the exhibition, one of which has a documentary that was created in 1950 by Paramount that was called The Costume Designer, where Edith talks a little bit about her process, and that's really fun, as well as a screen test with Audrey Hepburn for Roman Holiday. I would say one of my favorite sections that we haven't talked about is designing for wartime, which this
Mhm.
is something I didn't really think about prior to the exhibition, is the impact that the war and subsequent fabric rationing had
Mm.
on Edith and other costume designers' work during that time,
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
creating like very pared down silhouettes with no embellishment and because there was no extra fabric to work with.
Right.
And also that coinciding with the rise in film noir. Researching that, Edith talked about it like it was almost her duty to set an example for the
Mm.
American public through film, this kind of patriotism and austerity in the face of the war.
Edith Head, an icon and celebrity in her own right. Her unique style and trademark professional wardrobe with tinted glasses and sharp bangs made her instantly recognizable. She enjoyed a close association with directors like Alfred Hitchcock and Cecil B. DeMille, both former film review contributors, by the way. Beyond the studio, she frequently appeared on television and radio shows to discuss fashion and trends. She wrote two best selling books, How to Dress for Success and The Dress Doctor, along with dozens of columns on fashion in newspapers and magazines, making herself a top authority on fashion and style. In a studio system dominated by men, she made herself essential. And this exhibit, equally essential. Once again, thank you to Kristen Pignolo and the Oklahoma City Museum of Art. That's our show. We hope you enjoyed the journey. If you like what we do, please consider becoming a member of Classic Movie Club. Your support helps us produce a new episode each month and continue the legacy of film review. You can learn more by visiting our show notes, where you'll also find a link to the Oklahoma City Museum of Art and an article on the collection of motion picture costume design by Larry McQueen. Don't forget to subscribe, like, review, and share the podcast with all your film friends. We invite you back next month for another adventure. Until then, here's looking at you, kid.